The silence that fell over the dinner table was heavier than the scent of roast chicken hanging in the air. It was a thick, suffocating silence, the kind that follows a grenade pin being pulled. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had just set her wine glass down with a delicate, deliberate click. Her smile, a thin, perfect slash of crimson lipstick, didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, sharp and assessing, were fixed on me. "You know, Sarah," she began, her voice deceptively sweet, "Mark and I were just talking the other day about legacy, about what a man leaves behind." My husband, Mark, shifted uncomfortably beside me, his hand finding mine under the mahogany table. I gave his fingers a reassuring squeeze, but my own were ice cold. I knew where this was going. We had been down this road so many times, a winding path paved with her passive-aggressive comments and leading to the same desolate destination. My empty womb. "It's been 5 years, dear," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "5 years of waiting, of hoping. We've been so patient." The word "we" was a dagger. It was never "we." It was always her, a one-woman committee on my reproductive failings. I tried to form a response, to offer one of the polite, rehearsed lines I kept for these occasions, but my throat was tight. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, we've talked about this." "Have we, Mark?" she retorted, her voice losing its sugary coating and revealing the steel beneath. "Or have you just been placating me while your wife—" "Well?" She paused, taking a slow sip of her wine, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. She looked directly at me, and the final shred of pretense fell away. Her face hardened, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're barren, Sarah, a beautiful, lovely, but ultimately useless vessel. You've failed at your most basic function as a woman, as a wife. You are a dead end." The words hit me with physical force. I felt the blood drain from my face, my ears ringing. I could feel the gazes of Mark's father and his aunt, who were also at the table, boring into me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. But I didn't look at them. I couldn't look away from Eleanor. "You're useless," she repeated, her voice rising now, laced with a cruelty that was almost gleeful. "You can't give my son a child, and you've stolen the years he could have spent with someone who could. You are a disappointment." That was it. Mark's hand, which had been gripping mine, went still. He slowly pulled away, and for one horrifying second, I thought he was abandoning me, leaving me to face her alone. But he didn't. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the polished floor, and stood. The entire table flinched. He walked to the sideboard where he'd left his briefcase, his movements calm and measured. He opened it, pulled out a thick cream-colored folder, and walked back to the table. He didn't look at me. He looked only at his mother. He placed the folder on the table with a soft but definitive thud. "You want to talk about disappointment, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but shaking with a rage I had never heard before. "You want to talk about why you don't have a grandchild?" He opened the folder. "Then let's talk." Our story didn't begin with this bitterness. It began with laughter in the cramped, wonderfully chaotic aisles of a used bookstore. Mark was searching for a rare first edition, and I was shelving a new shipment of poetry. He'd knocked over a stack of books, sending them cascading to the floor, and his apology was so earnest, so flustered, that I found myself smiling before I could stop. He had kind eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. We fell in love easily, quietly. Our life was built on small, sturdy things: late-night conversations, shared cups of coffee, the comfortable silence of reading side by side. He was an architect who saw beauty in structure and form. I was a librarian who found magic in words and stories. Together, we made sense. We married 2 years later, a simple ceremony in a garden with our closest friends and family. Eleanor was, of course, impeccable. She wore a pale blue dress that was just a shade too elegant for a garden wedding, and her smile was a masterclass in polite reservation. "Sarah is a lovely girl," I overheard her telling a cousin. "A bit. Simple, perhaps. But she makes Mark happy, for now." For now. That phrase became the invisible soundtrack to our marriage. From the moment we said, "I do," the countdown began. At first, her comments were subtle, wrapped in the guise of motherly advice. "Don't wait too long, you two. My biological clock was a ticking time bomb by the time I was your age." She'd say it with a light laugh, but her eyes were serious. When we bought our house, a charming bungalow with a big backyard, her first comment wasn't about the beautiful hardwood floors or the stained glass windows. It was, "So much room for a nursery, and a spare room for when the second one comes along." The pressure was constant, a low-grade hum of expectation that vibrated through every family gathering, every holiday, every phone call. After our second anniversary, the questions became more direct. "Is everything all right, dear? You know, there are specialists." We had already started trying, a secret journey that was supposed to be joyful and intimate, but quickly became a landscape of calendars, temperature charts, and crushing disappointment each month. The doctor's appointments began. The invasive tests, the blood work, the hushed conversations in sterile white rooms. Each negative result was a small death, a fresh wave of grief that I tried to hide from everyone but Mark. And through it all, Eleanor's campaign of subtle psychological warfare continued. She would accidentally forward me emails with articles titled, "Boosting Your Fertility Over 30." She'd buy baby clothes for her friends' grandchildren and show them to me, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Isn't this just the sweetest little thing? Oh, but I shouldn't be showing you this. It's probably too painful." Mark tried to shield me. He'd cut her off, change the subject, or insist we leave early. But her words were like burrs. They clung to me long after we were home, pricking at the rawest parts of my self-worth. I started to believe her. Maybe I was failing. Maybe I was the dead end. The appointment that changed everything was on a Tuesday in April. The air outside was thick with the smell of rain and blooming lilacs, a promise of new life that felt like a cruel joke. We sat in Dr. Allen's office, the same beige chairs, the same generic landscape painting on the wall. We'd been there so many times before, bracing for the same gentle letdown. I had undergone the final, most invasive round of testing a few weeks prior, and this was the follow-up to discuss the results and, presumably, our next steps into the expensive and emotionally draining world of IVF doctors. Allen came in, her expression calm and unreadable. She sat down, folded her hands on her desk, and looked at us over the rim of her glasses. She didn't look at me first, which was unusual. She looked at Mark. "We have the complete results," she said softly. "Sarah, all of your tests came back perfectly normal. Your fertility levels are excellent. There is absolutely no reason you shouldn't be able to conceive." A wave of relief, so powerful it was dizzying, washed over me. It wasn't me. For years, I had carried the weight of this failure, the secret shame that I was broken. It wasn't me. But my relief was cut short by the sight of Mark's face. He had gone completely pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. He knew what was coming next. Dr. Allen turned her gentle gaze to him. "What's coming next?" "Mark," she said, her voice filled with a careful compassion. "Your results, however, show a significant issue. You have what's called severe oligozoospermia, combined with poor motility. To be blunt, your sperm count is extremely low, and those that are present are not strong enough. The chances of natural conception are, I'm afraid, less than 1%. The silence in the room was absolute. I reached for Mark's hand. It was cold and limp in mine. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall, at the generic painting of a placid lake. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping. He looked like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. In the car on the way home, he didn't speak. He just drove, his eyes fixed on the road, his face a mask of devastation. I didn't push. When we finally pulled into our driveway, he turned off the engine and just sat there. "It's me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All this time, it was me. I'm the one who's broken." I unbuckled my seatbelt and turned to him. "Hey," I said softly, touching his cheek. "Look at me." He finally did, and his eyes were swimming with tears. "You are not broken," I said, my voice firm. "And we are not broken. This doesn't change anything. You and I, this is the family. Anything else is just extra. He broke then, his head falling into his hands as sobs racked his body. I held him, stroking his hair, whispering that we would figure it out together. Later that night, after the tears had subsided, he looked at me with a raw fear I had never seen before. "Please, Sarah," he begged. "Don't tell my mother, not yet. I can't. I can't face her knowing this. She always wanted me to be perfect. The son who could do anything. This would crush her. It would crush me." I agreed. I promised. I would carry his secret because I loved him, and I understood his fear of her judgment. I just didn't realize that in protecting him from her, I was offering myself up as the sacrifice. The 6 months following that diagnosis were a quiet agony. We told no one. To the outside world, we were still the couple who was trying, the ones who smiled politely through baby shower announcements and deflected questions about when we'd be starting our own family. But at home, a new tenderness grew between us, forged in the fires of our shared secret. Mark started seeing a therapist to work through his feelings of inadequacy and the deep-seated fear of his mother's judgment. We started researching adoption, our conversations shifting from what we had lost to what we could build. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. But Eleanor's campaign did not cease. If anything, it escalated. It was as if she could sense the shift in our focus away from her grandchild-centric universe, and it made her desperate. The phone calls became more frequent. "Sarah, I saw the most darling little christening gown today. It made me think of you." Well, of what could be. She'd leave magazines on our coffee table, conveniently open to articles about miracle babies and late-in-life pregnancies. Mark did his best to run interference. He screened her calls, invented excuses for us to miss family dinners, and flatly told her to stop sending us links to fertility blogs. But she was relentless, a force of nature fueled by a singular, obsessive desire. The final straw came a week before the fateful dinner. It was a Saturday morning. We were in the garden, planting hydrangeas, our hands covered in dirt, laughing for the first time in what felt like a long while. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Eleanor. It wasn't words. It was a photo, a picture of a newborn baby, swaddled in a blue blanket, with a caption beneath it. "Meet Theodore James. My friend Carol is a grandmother again. Some people are just so blessed." I felt the air leave my lungs. Mark saw my face and took the phone from my hand. I watched him read the text, and a cold fury settled in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He just typed back a single sentence. "We are coming to dinner next Sunday. We have something to discuss." He thought he could control it, that he could sit her down and gently set a boundary she could no longer cross. That he wanted to tell her we were considering adoption, to ask her to finally, for the love of God, back off. He was trying to protect me, to end the siege. He had no idea she was preparing for an all-out assault. The day of the dinner, I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. "We don't have to go," I told Mark as I fastened a pair of earrings. "We can just call her." "No," he said, adjusting his tie, his reflection steely in the mirror. "This has to be done in person. She needs to see we're a united front. I won't let her hurt you anymore, Sarah. I promise." He meant it. I knew he did. But as we walked up the stone path to his parents' house, the scent of Eleanor's prize-winning roses filling the air, I felt like we were lambs walking willingly into a lion's den. I just didn't know Mark was the one who was about to roar. The air in the dining room was thick with unspoken words. The clinking of silverware against porcelain sounded unnaturally loud. Mark's father, a quiet man who had long ago ceded all domestic power to Eleanor, was meticulously cutting his roast chicken into perfect squares, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mark's aunt was stirring her iced tea, the frantic little circles of her spoon betraying her nervousness. And then there was Eleanor, holding court from the head of the table, her smile as sharp as the knife beside her plate. She had spent the first 20 minutes of dinner regaling us with stories of her friends' grandchildren, their first steps, their first words, their brilliant futures at Ivy League preschools. Every story was a perfectly aimed dart, and I was the bullseye. I tried to deflect, to change the subject to Mark's latest architectural project, to the book I was reading, to the weather, but she would always, with practiced ease, steer the conversation back. "That's nice, dear," she'd say with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But a building is just a building. A legacy, Mark, is blood." That's when Mark squeezed my hand under the table, the signal that he was about to speak, to enact the plan we discussed. But Eleanor beat him to it. She set her wine glass down, the click silencing the table, and launched her final brutal attack. "You're barren, Sarah. A beautiful, lovely, but ultimately useless vessel." Her voice was low now, intimate, which made it all the more venomous. "You've failed at your most basic function." Mark started to rise, but I put a hand on his arm, a silent plea to let me handle it, a mistake I would instantly regret. It only emboldened her. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "You are a dead end. You're useless. You can't give my son a child, and you've stolen the years he could have spent with someone who could. You are a disappointment." That's when Mark stood. He didn't just push his chair back, he shoved it, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. He walked to his briefcase, his back ramrod straight, and retrieved the folder. He laid it on the table. "You want to talk about disappointment, Mom? You want to talk about why you don't have a grandchild? Then let's talk." He flipped open the folder, his hands perfectly steady. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, a lab report from the fertility clinic. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word he spoke landed with the force of a physical blow. "This is a semen analysis report, Mom. Dated April 12th. I'll spare you the medical jargon, but I'll read you the conclusion." He looked directly into her eyes, his own cold and clear. Conclusion: severe oligozoospermia with asthenozoospermia. Sperm concentration is critically low at less than 1 million per milliliter. Motility is severely impaired. The probability of natural conception is statistically insignificant. He let the words hang in the air. Eleanor's crimson-lipped smile had vanished. Her face was a mask of confusion. "What? What does that mean?" she stammered. Mark's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "It means I'm sterile, Mom. It means I am the reason we can't have a baby. It means for the last 5 years, you have been torturing the one person who has stood by me, loved me, and supported me through the single greatest heartbreak of my life. You have been abusing an innocent woman, while your perfect son is the one who is, in your words, a dead end." He tossed the paper onto the table in front of her. It slid across the polished wood and came to rest next to her plate of half-eaten chicken. Eleanor stared at it, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in real time. The color drained from her face, leaving her lipstick looking garish and clown-like. She looked from the paper to Mark, then to me, her eyes wide with a dawning, unutterable horror. She had built her entire identity on being the mother of a perfect son, and he had just demolished it with a single sheet of paper. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Eleanor sat frozen, her hand hovering over the lab report as if she were afraid it might burn her. Mark's father had stopped eating entirely, his fork suspended mid-air. His aunt was staring into her lap, her face flushed with a second-hand shame so intense it was palpable. Mark stood there, his chest rising and falling, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly beginning to fade, leaving behind a raw, trembling exhaustion. He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound, aching apology. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay." He reached for my hand and helped me to my feet. "We're leaving," he said to the room at large, though his gaze never left his mother. He led me out of the dining room, past the stunned faces of his family, and into the cool night air. The car ride home was silent, but it wasn't the tense, brittle silence of before. This was a heavy, processing silence. I watched the streetlights blur past my window, each one a fleeting star in the darkness. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was hollowed out, emptied of all the anxiety and dread I had been carrying for years. When we pulled into our driveway, Mark turned off the car, but didn't move to get out. He just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel. I'm so sorry, Sarah, he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I should have done that years ago. I should never have let her treat you that way. I was a coward. You weren't a coward, I said, turning to him. You were hurt, and you were trying to protect yourself. By letting her hurt you instead? He asked, his voice breaking. That's not protection. That's just redirecting the damage. He finally let go of the steering wheel and covered his face with his hands. She looked at me, like I was a stranger, like I had betrayed her. You told her the truth, Mark. I shattered her image of me, he said, looking up, his eyes red-rimmed. And maybe that's what I was afraid of all along. Not her judgment of me, but the loss of her adoration. It's sick, isn't it? It's human, I replied softly. I reached across the console and took his hand. It was warm now. She didn't just attack me tonight, Mark. She attacked us, our marriage, our life. What you did in there, you defended us. You chose us. He squeezed my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. It was always us, he said. I just forgot how to show it. I let her voice get louder than yours in my head. That will never happen again. We walked into our quiet house, leaving the ghosts of that dinner party behind us on his parents' doorstep. That night, for the first time in a long time, we didn't talk about doctors or timelines or what-ifs. We just held each other, two people who had weathered a storm and found their way back to the shore, battered but together. The foundation of our marriage, once shaken, had been reset on solid ground. The fallout began the next day. It wasn't a loud explosion, but a series of quiet, pathetic implosions. My phone remained silent. Mark's, however, did not. His father called first, a brief, stilted conversation in which he mumbled something about Eleanor being very upset and not herself. He didn't apologize for his silence at the table, nor did he ask how we were. It was a call made out of obligation, a checking of a box. Mark was polite but distant. She'll be fine, Dad, he'd said, his voice flat. She's a survivor. Then came the text messages from his aunt, a flurry of them, each one a masterwork of passive aggression. I hope you know what you've done. Your mother is devastated. Family should be about support, not public humiliation. She only ever wanted what was best for you. Mark read them aloud to me, not with anger, but with a kind of weary detachment. They still don't get it, he said, shaking his head. They think the problem was that I embarrassed her, not that she was emotionally abusing my wife. He blocked his aunt's number without another word. The main event, of course, was Eleanor. She waited 3 days. Then she appeared on our doorstep. I saw her car pull up through the living room window, and my stomach instantly clenched. Mark went to the door alone. I stood in the hallway, out of sight but close enough to hear. Mark, honey, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. We need to talk. I haven't slept. I've been so worried about you. I'm fine, Mom. Mark's voice was steady, a wall she couldn't scale. You should go home. I can't, she cried, the tears sounding practiced. Not until you understand. I was only pushing because I love you. I want you to have a full life, a family. I didn't know. How could I have known? Why didn't you tell me? There it was. The pivot. It wasn't her fault for being cruel. It was our fault for keeping a secret. It wasn't your business to know, Mom, Mark replied calmly. And it was never an excuse to treat Sarah the way you did. You owe her an apology. She stammered. I'm sorry if she was offended. She's just so sensitive. Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. That's not an apology. That's an excuse. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry your perfect son isn't so perfect. A long silence followed. I could picture her standing on our porch, her face crumbling as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. What do you want from me, Mark? She finally whispered. I want you to get help, he said. And until you do, Until you can offer my wife a genuine, heartfelt apology for the years of pain you've caused her, you are not welcome in our home. We need space. I need space! The sound of her sharp, indignant gasp was followed by the clicking of her heels retreating down our walkway. When Mark closed the door, he leaned against it and let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolved. "The cycle ends with us," he said. And I believed him. 6 months later, our house was quiet in a way it had never been before. It was a peaceful quiet, not a tense one. It was filled with the scent of fresh paint from the room we were converting into a home library and the sound of jazz playing softly from the kitchen speakers. There were no more passive-aggressive texts, no more dreaded Sunday dinners, no more walking on eggshells. There was just us. We had started the adoption process. It was a mountain of paperwork, of interviews, of waiting. But we were climbing it together. We attended seminars on weekends, learning about open adoptions and the challenges of raising a child who had experienced loss. There were no illusions. We knew it would be hard. But it was a hopeful kind of hard, a chosen path. Mark had continued with his therapy, and I had joined him for a few sessions. We talked about communication, about boundaries, and about the long shadow his mother had cast over our lives. He learned to separate his worth from her expectations. I learned to let go of the anger I hadn't realized I was still holding. One afternoon, we were sitting on the porch swing, drinking lemonade, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. A small box was delivered to the front step. It was from Eleanor. Mark opened it cautiously. The front step. Inside was a framed photo of us from our wedding day. Tucked behind it was a handwritten letter. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was rambling and self-pitying in parts. But buried within it were 3 words we had never thought we'd hear. I was wrong. She wrote about how her obsession with a grandchild had blinded her to the wonderful woman her son had married. She wrote that she was starting therapy. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only to say that she hoped one day she could earn back a small piece of our trust. Mark read the letter, folded it carefully, and put it back in the box. "It's a start," he said quietly. "Yeah," I agreed. "It's a start." We didn't call her. We weren't ready for that. But for the first time, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like an open road, with multiple paths leading forward. That evening, as we painted the final wall in our new library a warm, sunny yellow, I looked at my husband. His face was relaxed, his smile easy. He was humming along with the music, a small smudge of paint on his cheek. He was no longer the man haunted by his mother's expectations. He was just Mark, and I was just Sarah. We weren't a solution to each other's problems or a means to an end. We were just a family, in the truest sense of the word. A team, built not on blood or biology, but on love, respect, and the quiet, fierce promise to always, always choose each other. And that was a legacy worth more than any grandchild.